I will give you an update on the low latency network development over the world, and I will focus my discussions on two most important markets in the US. One, which is the Chicago to New Jersey, and the other one, the New Jersey Triangle. And then I will turn to discussing some old technology called shortwave radio, also called HF, because at the time when it was developed, it was really high frequency. It's between 3 and 30 megahertz, and it's about disseminating data throughout the world using the same technology as the Voice of America. So conventional grandfather's radio. So our company builds networks. So we go and we install dishes on towers, and we put radios on behind them, and we do that all over the world. And what I represent here is our effort as joining the dots. So we join the dots, that's what we do. And we physically go and build. And what we do is we build the lowest latency networks when we can. And obviously there are other people in the same industry that try to do the lowest latency networks. So sometimes we win, sometimes we lose, but we always try. The story of the most interesting line in the world is the line between Chicago and New Jersey. And that line has seen a lot of investment. About 10 years ago, there was a first little bit of activity. It was very secretive, and a few people started building networks. And it's hard to keep these things secret, because if you're a trading firm and you always lose the trade to someone else, you try to find out why, and those guys are really smart, and after a while they understand. And then when one understands, like most of them understand, because they also they're a little chatty sometimes, they drink beer, so the word gets around. And maybe 8 years ago, there was a flurry of building activity. And what I've plotted here is a way to get a sense of who's been doing what and what's still being done. So I have plotted here as a function of time, and its number of months, and the horizontal axis, the number of active licenses filed at the FCC for the subset of companies that play in that game. So you can see that there are a few companies that did work back 8 years ago and essentially started not being very successful and stopped working on it. And you can see there are a few that are still at it. So the top one is New Line Networks. New Line Networks is owned by Virtue Financial and Jump Trading. They're one of the powerhouses of high-frequency trading, and you wouldn't be surprised of seeing them there. Then you can see the other guys, which are the green dots. The green dots are essentially the same company. It's DRW Vigilant. They're the other super big powerhouse of high-frequency trading, or at least low-latency networks, and they're really still at it. And what's interesting is those two license counts, you can see they're improving continuously. And the orange guys is McKay Brothers. And the point I was trying to make here is that it started as a race with many, many participants, and I haven't shown you all the licenses that were abandoned, but it did start as a race with, I don't know, maybe 20 different networks. And now we're down to 3 people competing. So another way to look at it is to look at where the licenses were filed over the past year and a half. And they were essentially filed between Chicago and New Jersey, and Chicago and Washington, D.C., and Washington, D.C. and New Jersey. So that's the Golden Triangle. We, McKay Brothers, only play in the Chicago to New Jersey side of the triangle. The other big guys, they play everywhere. So what you can see is that the density of the blue gets better on the geodesic. So there's activity outside of the perfect path, but most of the activity is on the perfect path. And our prediction, and I must apologize because it was a little lazy, I used a slide from last June, and I had a prediction that by the end of this year, the three big networks would be within 1 microsecond of each other. And it looks like it could be only Q1 of next year because we're a bit late delivering that latest iteration of our network. So no apologies for the non-updated slide. Here you see also the yellow arrows point to things that are a little strange. And some of those are to the left around Chicago. It looks like tails for something that doesn't make sense certainly to go to New Jersey. In New Jersey, you go down to Long Island. That's a little strange. And there are also telltale activities of people getting Sears to connect malware more efficiently. So what do you think are those strange tales? Any guess? And guesses can only come from the people that don't know, because they're not guesses otherwise. No guess? Well, those tales are probably due to what I will talk about in the second part of the talk, which is the shortwave networks. So people connecting broadcast station to markets, to the data centers. So you need to go very efficiently from the data center to one place where you will broadcast data all over the world. But if you think of it being within 1 microsecond of each other with 3 competing networks over a 1,200 kilometer link, that is a really beautiful achievement. Like, it's great engineering, and that's something that amongst all the jockeying and the fight of trying to be the fastest, I think the 3 companies are very proud of what they do, and they like what they have achieved so far. So let me now turn to the discussion on New Jersey local, which is a much more topical thing here in New York. And this is very different. So it started around the same time, and there was also a land grab to install networks between the 3 data centers. And actually, McKay didn't play very much in that land grab. And the companies that were successful were called Apsara, now acquired by BSO, Innova, and Totora is less known because it's a prop trading firm which owns Totora. But those are the companies that were the most successful in establishing networks in New Jersey. The reason we did not play in that game at the beginning is because we had a long shot idea of trying to use a completely different band. And when I say band, is a different type of frequency. Everyone is using frequencies which are around 80 gigahertz, which are great. They give you a lot of bandwidth, but they have the issue of being down when it rains. What we went for is a frequency at 28 gigahertz, which was bought in an auction by XO Communication a long time ago on the idea that they would deploy a technology called LMDS. So I don't know if you guys know LMDS. It's like WiMAX. It's one of those technologies that had great hopes and never made it. So they were sitting on that frequency band, and we acquired the rights to that band between the data centers. And we were sitting on those, and we didn't have any radios, and it took us essentially 5 years to develop the right radios for that. Now that is done. We turned up the last little bit of that triangle, I think 2 weeks ago, or maybe a week ago. And now we're up on every leg. And we're up, we have a frequency which is unique to us, so there's no interference. We're straighter, so we're faster, and we have more bandwidth than most other people, and we're also more reliable. So that's a big win, and it has been a huge success commercially. So why more bandwidth is useful? So obviously what we want to do is we transmit market data in this case. We don't sell bandwidth. We do sell bandwidth also, but it's a secondary offer. Our main offer is transmitting raw data. And to transmit raw data, you need a pipe which is about the size of the pipe that the market gives you to feed you data. So our pipe is around 7 gigabits per second, and the market sends us data 10 gigabits per second. And of course, like you model and you say, okay, I have access to 7 gigabits per second. What is my edge over the guys that have 1 gigabit per second? And most of the E-band guys have 1 gigabit per second. And I think the NASDAQ distributed data, also the NYSE distributed data runs over 1 gigabit connections. So what do we bring? And suppose we're at the same latency. We're actually a little better in terms of indirection, but suppose we're at the same latency. What does bandwidth bring? So essentially, bandwidth gives you better serialization delay. So you have a packet, you need to fit it in a pipe, and if the packet's big, it'll take a while to get into the pipe. And the bigger the pipe, the shorter amount of time that will get through the pipe. So that difference for the NASDAQ FPGA feed, you can see here there's a distribution. On the horizontal axis, it's nanoseconds. On the vertical axis, it's the cumulative percentage of packets which get through under that number of nanoseconds. And really, on the left, they're a model of doing this, and the actual performance of our network against the model, which is almost spot on. And on the right is the model for a 1 gigabit network. So here you see that the difference between our network and the 1 gigabit networks is that essentially there's a 600 nanosecond advantage. And you may not think this is big. And really, you would really want to see what happens in the tails, because that's, 600 nanoseconds is large for those people doing high frequency trading, but it may not be the whole story. So what's happening in the tail? NASDAQ, the market data is not generally interesting. Like it's someone reposting a little bit of volume on the third limit. Like nobody cares about this. That's the vast majority of the messages sent by the market. But if you focus on the messages which are interesting, and let's define that subset of messages as those which carry a trade in the S&P 100 stocks, then you have a slightly different picture. So if you do the same exercise, do the distribution of the difference of latency between our network and a 1 gigabit per second network, you see that there is, when it's important, there's a lot more difference because there's congestion, there are bigger packets, there's actually a lot of buffering if you have a 1 gigabit network, which makes the difference just from serialization and from bandwidth more of the order of 2 microseconds. And then 2 microseconds, I think for most people that do high frequency trading, that really is hugely significant. So that's the story. We're very proud. I can't avoid saying it. I'm sorry. Let me turn to the other part of my talk where I'm not proud at all because I haven't done anything so far. So at least, that'll average out. So this, I've put here the centers of liquidity on Earth. And what you would really want to do with HF is link all the places that are not linkable with traditional microwave. Essentially, HF will never, ever compete with microwave if you can do terrestrial microwave. But if you have to go transatlantic or transpacific or trans-Russia, then HF may win. So how do we think about HF? And how do we investigate who's doing it and what's being done in the field? So you can turn to the same source. You go to the FCC database, and you look at the broadcast license that were filed not far from the CME. So we looked at those in a 200-kilometer radius around the CME, and you can see that there's some amount of activity. And what's fun, it's it's the same game as the microwave game. Like, everybody's trying to hide. Not quite everybody, but most people are trying to hide. So if you look at the name of the companies to see if all of those are actual low latency applications, you go to the names, and you would probably not recognize the names. But if you have a good guesswork, some of the names are HFT competitors, and some are probably not. You know, I would bet that DuPage public safety communication is probably not an HFT. If that were an HFT, that's really sneaky. You know, I'm not saying not everybody's sneaky. There are sneaky people here, and they were great names in the microwave game. They were names like Thought Transmission, you know, and the companies that were hiding licenses or like carrying licenses, hiding the owners. Anyway, so if you care to investigate, you can try and see who's behind this, and obviously it's the usual suspects. And by location, you can see that they're not very far from the CME. If you rely on actually train spotters, there are antenna spotters too. So people go take pictures, put them on blogs, and you can have a lot of very good information through that. So that's another way to get a little bit of intel on what's going on. Another way is actually what we've been trying to do is just you can listen to what's being broadcast. So you set up listening station and you see which tower broadcast what kind of frequency where. And this is something where you have as a function of time and for given frequencies, the color gives you the power that's being transmitted. So you can see there are tones here. And the tones, it's like whistling on one given frequency, and when you alter the way you whistle, you either modulate with amplitude by whistling higher with more or less, or you can modulate with frequency by whistling with a tone that's a little higher and a little lower. And by doing that, you do something which is change the phase. So if you whistle a little faster for a bit of time, that changes the phase of that tone. So if you plot the phase as a function of time, you can see that this data that is presumably transmitted here, and here it looks clean because we listened close to the source. But the question is, can you actually receive it somewhere in Europe? Well, oh no, sorry. That is just to set the scale of how fast you change in your modulation, how fast you change the modulation, and the rate of change you should remember is about 10 millisecond. That's an order of magnitude. Maybe it should be 1, maybe it should be 5, but 10 millisecond is an order of magnitude. And if you have 8 tones that each can change every 10 millisecond, then you can send 1 byte per 10 millisecond. You know, that gives you an order of magnitude. This is to say that we can receive it in Europe. It's fairly clean, and you can see the center tones have a better signal-to-noise ratio. You can also analyze it, and there again you can see that the signal-to-noise ratio you can see in Europe with a very simple listening apparatus. And you can use that presumably to decide whether you want to buy or sell Euro stocks. Okay, so what would you use it for if you can send 1 byte every 10 millisecond? Well, you would presumably use it to send big events on the CME. And the big events are what we call trade-throughs. Like one guy comes in and sweeps the first limit, maybe the second limit. That's a trade-through. That's something that triggers a reaction, presumably somewhere all over the world, and in particular would trigger reactions in Frankfurt. So let me look at the analysis here of what it does. Here we plotted on the horizontal axis, time, and this is time elapsed after a trade through. So what you can see is a little bit of activity. There are 2 bumps, and then there's a big response time. The big response time is at the delay of transporting the data from the CME via microwave to NY4, then via Hibernia cable, the Ultra One, the fastest cable, transatlantic to LD4, and then microwave again from LD4 to Frankfurt. That's the big response time. But if you zoom in the little bumps, and you can see in the inset there are really 2 bumps before, you can see that some people are actually trading before that. And I would guess that this is people using some kind of HF transmission method. And the second bump actually coincidentally corresponds to the latency that Raft, I think they're present here, announced, and that is maybe their clients. And the first bump could be the guys that installed shortwave broadcast networks, and which are the usual suspects. The interesting thing here is that they were about, on that particular day of August, there were about 2,000 Eurostock trade-throughs, and you can see an echo effect on 4,000 trades on DAX and 2,000 trades on Eurostocks. So why more trades on DAX? First, that's who has a guess? So the answer to that is that the tick size of DAX is half the tick size of Eurostocks. So moves in the CME have a bigger impact on the number of ticks that the DAX is going to move than the number of ticks that the Eurostoxx is going to move. That's as simple as that. So here, the other thing that's really interesting is you should look at the blue line, and the blue line is the cumulative number of trades. And you can see that cumulative number of trades seems to be around 30% before the traditional microwave plus fiber plus microwave time delay kicks in. That means if those trades are really HF triggered, that it's the HF networks are taking about 30% of the trade throughs impact on Frankfurt. That's a large number. We looked at this number a year ago, and it was about 20%. So it is also indicative and would speak to the narrative that HF is not only extremely present today, but it's also rapidly evolving as a technology from 20% last year to 30% this year. With this, I will leave you with little graphs. That's just to say that Voice of America is now turned into Voice of Chicago. It sounds like the center of the world is here, and everybody's going to be listening. If you want to study the thing, there are many fun tools that you can use that were developed a long time ago for other purposes, but they are presumably being used by our industry now. I thank you very much for your attention.